Okay. Yay! Yochsetim. Okay. So let's see. I'm gonna Chish. Sheesh. All right, so let's just start with a discussion. Anything that you guys want to talk about from the beginning, kind of introduction? Anything that stood out? Any questions you had?
I like that you defined the, what's it called? Those two definitions at the very beginning about fallacies.
Oh, yeah.
Right, right. So yeah, just different things to think about when you come into a native language. And I talked to both of them at some length about this. And it can be trouble. Sometimes someone might come in and they'll think, I'm Tlingit. There's some spiritual aspect to this. If I come in here, boom, right? But it takes an awful lot of hard work. And that work is really just practicing, making flashcards, doing different types of things that that keep you in the language. And it was interesting because then someone might come in who's Tlingit and see someone who's not Tlingit who is learning faster than they are. And that could create some just sort of strange emotions. And so it's good to have those conversations on there. Some of the other things that do happen is I think we talk about how many people are coming back to the language. And it's sort of a double-edged sword. Like a colleague of mine was in Hawaii, and they've got thousands of kids fluent in their language right now because they have Hawaiian schools that they study everything in Hawaiian. And so he was talking to some of the leaders of this Hawaiian school movement. And he said, man, how did you guys succeed? And they said, succeed? We've never succeeded. We never will. He said, because if you feel like you succeeded, you could sort of take it easy. Like you can never take it easy. And so those are some interesting sort of philosophies to look at language learning, to try and be very realistic about it. What is it going to take? Because you can know about a language. You say, oh yeah, Tlingit has classifiers and it does crazy things with verbs. And here's this. But can you just sort of engage in the language? And you gotta really do a lot of both as a second language learner. You gotta be able to explain the nuts and bolts of the language, but you have to be able to just dive into the language. And it takes a while to really learn how to think about things in a Tlingit way as well. Other things?
I kind of found the writing system frustrating a little bit to begin with, just because speaking writing English, I've got a bit of French. I've studied some phonetics, and they all kind of use the same symbols in different ways. It's kind of knowing use a different usage of the letter E and the letter I and stuff. One thing I found really helpful that I didn't realize before, though, with the writing system is when a letter is underlined, it's glottalized.
Right.
And yeah, just kind of for some reason.
So whenever you've got the underline, you're going into the back of the throat type of sound. So,
yeah, that was, kind of the writing system went up a notch in my books when I found it out.
Nice.
It's really smart way to use a simple like that.
Yeah, and so the other thing that's going on now is there's no Unicode symbol for an underlying character. There is with a K. It kind of has a little short underline on it. So what happens now is you use combining diacritical marks. And so there's a character like a K, and then there's another character that comes after it. It's an underline that goes back behind the character. So it moves back. So it can create some problems. Some fonts don't like it, but they seem to be getting better. But one of the things that would happen is, well, first, the early versions of Beginning Tlingit, which you can probably find at the state archives, is it's an 8.5 by 11, and somebody typed it, and somebody went through and all of the underline marks. marks and all of the tone marks by hand.
They might have one of those that you
Yeah, they might have one. I got my hands on one somewhere. And then as typography changed, so then they started using underlined characters and underlining on a typewriter, and then getting into word processors, and then underlining. But one of the problems of this is you might cut something and paste it, and when you paste it, you might lose the format, which, it's happened to me. I was working on a really big project, and I lost all my underlines, and I went through and tried to fix them, but then just missed a whole mess of them.
There's no underlined characters on the iPhone keyboard. That's typing things out.
You can type on an iPhone, yes, you actually can. With there's these combining marks. I'll have to show you guys, we'll dig it out and show you guys a picture of it. But you can set it up so every time you type KH, so what you do is
Does it autocorrect?
You autocorrect. But the problem with it is you've got to, say your word was, something with an underlined K in the middle. Well, let's say your word was, even like ha, so it's at the beginning. So you would type KH, it would suggest the K underline, and you would push it, and then you would have the backspace, and then continue writing the word. And so on an iPhone or an iPad or whatever, when you're holding the vowel down, you get some options, and you can get the tone marks and the vowels. And that's easier.
Yeah, the tone marks are there, but because underlined others.
Yeah, so like Shanahwani, you would type SHANA space XH space, and it would autocorrect for you. Then you have to go to the back of that underline X and backspace, and go to the front of it and backspace and continue type.
Well, you can use different keyboards for different languages, but are the underlined letters in any other language?
Yeah, they use in Haida, they use them in quite a few different languages. If you're working on a Mac, I can help you guys set up a keyboard on your Mac that has the combined diacritic built in. If you're working on a PC, you install a keyboard from a website called Language Geek. You just Google Tlingit keyboard, it comes up. And it's not the easiest thing to do, but once you've installed it, and again, we can theoretically have a tech day. I taught like a whole 2 years of Tlingit. I kept saying, we're going to have tech day, bring your computer, and we never had it. So. But we will at some point. The eternal promise. And then we'll help set up your computers. If you have the Crippen keyboard, when you hold down the Alt button, and if you type a vowel, it will be high-toned. And if you type one of the consonants with an underline, it will have the underline built in. With the Language Geek keyboard, you would type the vowel, and then you would type the / button, and that would put the tone mark on it. You would type the consonant, and you would push the semicolon button, and that would put the underline on it. So you do it. It's a second step after the button. Anything else?
I can't find it, but I really liked, it was in one of the introductions, or the prefixes or something, the idea that at best all anyone is doing is imitating their ancestors.
Right. And so it's such an interesting concept, and there's a verb for it. There's two different ways you can say it. And it's been said for a long time. And it's interesting because even when there were fluent speakers who were saying this 30, 40 years ago, we can only imitate our ancestors. And this is done sometimes in ceremonies. Somebody's called upon to stand up and speak on some occasion, like especially say, somebody has died and everybody's trying to recover from that. They might say, I'm not strong enough to do this. I'm going to imitate one of my, and usually you're calling out people from your clan, and you're saying they're here, they're the ones speaking for me. And it does a number of things. One is it sort of says I'm asking for help from our ancestors. The other thing is you're communicating to whoever you're talking to, which is usually your clan opposites. We're bringing these people out for you because we care, because this moment is so important. But same with, actions and speech and things is we understand that we went through a language decay, and so there's fewer pieces around to grab. So sometimes it makes it hard. One of the Downhower's big concerns is that people will speak Tlingit 20 years from now, but it'll be a very simple form of Tlingit. We won't have the highly complex things that are there. Both, and when we talk about complex, we're talking about metaphors, extended metaphors, grammatical metaphors, and we're also talking about using a whole wide variety of verb modes. Because when you get into Tlingit verbs, they get super awesome. But there's a whole bunch of different rules you've got to internalize and then be able to reproduce and also interpret as they're sort of happening. And so those are some of the things that they did talk about. So when they talk about imitating our ancestors, that's where sort of that concept comes from. Okay. So let's get this thing set up. Get my little mouse. Okay. Now I'm going to share the screens. Everybody doing okay? Nobody answers that question. Yes. So we've been doing some sound practice. We also spent a day and a half sort of talking about the philosophy of language learning. We're going to shift gears a little bit because we got up to some super crazy sounds, and we're going to actually set those aside. Maybe we'll pick them up after the weekend. But we're just going to start learning just focusing on some names of things. And the way that the beginning Tlingit was structured by the Downhowers is, even though we do the sound practice thing, is they actually found a lot of words that are really good words to know, but that don't contain any of those hard sounds until you start getting into it, lesson 2 and lesson 3. So we had our mouth do all these crazy things. And now we'll sort of set that aside for a second and focus on some concept things, and also just starting to learn how to ask basic questions, and also to give basic responses. Right? Question answer things. There's a lot that goes on with language, and especially it's a good way to go sort of back and forth with folks. So at some point we'll probably bring in some little stuffed animals, some other things, we'll goof around with them. For now we'll look at images. And the things we're going to do is we're going to look at how questions are formed. We'll take a sneak peek at how verbs function and how sort of Tlingit puts sentences together. The word order is different than it is in English. We'll just sort of start there. And we'll get to the reasons why. So let's just talk about what we would call asagi. The name of something. So I really thought about this over the summer. Last winter I was sitting down with Kate Knuckle, John Martin, and I was talking about when I went to Hawaii. By the end of the second year of language study, they are fully immersed in Hawaiian. They don't use English anymore in their language classes. And I was blown away because I don't know. That's a long-term goal of mine. But that's going to take a lot of energy to get there. And we got to sort of rethink how we do things, because we end up jumping out and using an awful lot of English to talk about language. One thing they did is they came up with grammatical terms. They said, well, here's our word for noun, and here's our word for verb, and here's our word for this and that. So we were working with some elders to come up with some of those terms. And it's interesting to see how a fluent speaker would think about these particular terms. Certain things that all languages tend to have. So asagi means its meaning. And when I thought about it, in another conversation I had with him earlier, he's a Tukdane Tan speaker from Huna, who lives here in Juneau, he's naming all these different trees. And I just said, what's the difference between red and yellow cedar? Talk to us about it in Tlingit. And he said, what David Katz said, who's the Christina Shangri from Papuan and also lives here. And they started off and John Martin started naming all of these trees. And when he got done, he said, because we know the names of those trees, we are Tlingit people. Right? So like identity was tied to knowledge of these things. It just made me think, for over 10,000 years, this is what these things have been called in this particular place. So what you're doing is you're learning what these things have been called for a long time. And so it's an act of familiarity for these things. And our first question is Dasa. Everybody say Dasa.
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 These are two different words that are combining. That part da is a particle, which means it doesn't. It's a type of particle that doesn't exist on its own. It pairs with the particle sa. And sa pops up in a number of different places. Like you could say, I hear it. Or you could say, I hear a voice. Right? So this sa particle, it's really interesting. It's a body part right around here at the base of the neck. And it has to do with where the voice comes from. So it's a body part. It's put into verbs, in the front of verbs to have something to do with a voice or speaking. And it also it forms questions, but also can form sort of commands, right? Like I could say, Tlingit einachsa, which literally means Tlingit, which is how you say Tlingit in Tlingit. Einach means through the mouth. Sa would mean, in that instance, means say it. So you're saying, say it in Tlingit. Tlingit einachsa. And I'll show, well, maybe I'll show you guys right now. Oh, I gotta work. Take two screen. So there's a couple of things. When we put an exclamation point on something, that doesn't mean we're yelling it. That means it's a command form, right? So that's how we signal command forms in Tlingit. When there's an exclamation point, that doesn't mean somebody's excited. It just means that's the command form. And we talk about command forms of verbs, and they're different in Tlingit. So, for example, you might say, I'm going to sit down, right? So sit down is the verb I'm using in that sense. I'm going to, is it in the future mode in English, but I might say, sit down, right? I don't always have to yell like that. I can just say, sit down, right? And the tone changes, right? It's faster, it's got more emphasis, and that's how you know it's a command form of the verb. And in Tlingit, we mark command forms like that. This one is not an actual, there's no verb in that. So one of the things we learn to do in Tlingit, we learn how to say a whole bunch of verbless stuff, because we don't have to conjugate it, right? It would always be Tlingit einachsa. But it would always be a command form, sort of in the moment type of thing. And that means say it in Tlingit. So going back, da, sa, it just means what, right? And the place that that phrase might be used is someone calls your name, da, sa, like, so like what? Or if somebody says something and you don't hear it, da, sa, you're asking them to say it again. Okay. Jump in if you have any questions. We're going to get to some drills. But what we'll do is we'll talk about how to form questions, and then we'll get to a whole bunch of things that are in beginning Tlingit, the nouns that are in beginning Tlingit, and we'll have a different way of introducing them. So this is a chart that shows you how to form questions in Tlingit. And it's really, this is based on 3 different particles that come together. So when we talk about sort of putting things together in Tlingit, in my brain, it's like a slot machine. This thing rolls up, and then this thing rolls up, and then this thing rolls up. And it means something, right? And in slot machines, you win or you lose, but in language, it means different combinations come together. So in the middle, you have sa. After that, you can have ya, he, we, or you. We'll get to what those mean. But the typical way that they combine, we'll just use we as an example, which means that over there, sort of. The T is optional. It pops up in certain instances, but not very often. So if I were to combine these, 1, 2, 3, the first one is da so way, da so way, da so way, da so way,
Da so way.
da so way.
Da so way.
Last night I was leaving my office. It was a little late. I was gonna crush some boxes over here because I've been moving my office. And I come up and I see something there, and it's very dark. Das away. What is that? My brain was like, what? Eek away. That's maybe a black bear. And then it was, and he went and he threw that can.
Oh my gosh.
That garbage can is not bear proof. He was like just pulling it open.
I saw that bear. This was yesterday?
Yeah.
He went past my trailer and I said, "Speak."
Yeah.
Eek.
Love
Oh,
eek.
eek.
Yeah, there you go.
Eek.
So then I drove up and then you walked down the hill. Once I saw him walking that way, I went and threw my boxes and ran in my car. Drove home.
What time was that?
Midnight.
Oh, that was late. Oh my god, you were here at midnight? Wow.
How big was the
It's like maybe that tall.
on the floors?
Pretty early, yeah.
Yeah, I think he's a 3-year-old.
It's probably about right.
Yeah.
I looked at the emergency handbook. It's like, bear eating garbage, don't do anything. Bear eating people, call 911. That's kind of the official thought. Okay. So we've got that subway part, subway. And what ends up happening is da, subway, you get a little bit of a pause. So usually you would write S, high tone A, W, high tone E as one word, even though it's a combination of a couple of particles. And it goes back and forth. Some people say it should be dasa. They should be combined. Because sometimes you do say dasa. But my suggestion is da is separate, sa is separate, subway would be one thing. So then if you said da, subway, we won't repeat all of them. I'm just going to go through and give you some examples. So if you said, hand me that cup, and you said it in Tlingit, and there are 3 cups here. Da, subway, which one from this group of known things, right? So instead of what, it's which one of those, right? A lot of ways that this is used is, what clan are you? When people ask that. Which clan do you belong to? The next one would be wasawe. So wa, so these particles, and it's dangerous at times if you break them into little particles. You can't just say wa. You can't just say that, right? It combines with the sa in these instances. Some of them you can use in other different ways, but some of them they tend to want to have that sa. So that one means how. And the way that this is used in Tlingit, like you could say, wasa'atune. Like if we came this morning, the garbage can was torn to pieces. It wasn't really torn, but it was open. There was some trash around. Wasa'atune. And that really means what happened. But you're just, really, the literal translation would be like, how did it get this way? So that's how. We'll see it in other instances. Wasa'etu wasa, which we usually translate as what's your name, but the literal translation would be how do people call you? Right. The other instance, I might say wasa'eti. We wrote that on the board there. How are you doing? And then if someone said terrible, just terrible. You say, wasaway? How is that? Right? You're asking for sort of more information. A dusaway would be, who is that? Right? So somebody's walking, and we know Tlingit, and we forgot that person's name, so we're trying to be smooth. A dusaway, right? Insider information. And this can be contracted to asaway. Sometimes you'll see it that way. Gusa. Goose. And this one, it doesn't like to be goose away. That doesn't really work. You could use say goosu. It tends to want to combine with this other particle, which means to be located somewhere. So this one, goo, it wants to have some sort of what we call a directional something sign. Right? Gusu ika, where's your mom? Gusu waits Eve. Gu de sapu waits Eve. First one, where is that bear? Second one, where did that bear walk? Where did it go? You want to know so that you don't go there. Kunsawe, how many? Kunsawe, Eve. How many black bears did you see? Then we get into the next sort of five are they need explanation. And we'll get to how these work. You'll see them around. This is just throwing some information at you before we start drilling. Because then we'll narrow it down to just one really simple question. What ginsawe? When in the future, right? Like someone might say, hey, I'm going to go to Sitka. What ginsawe? When are you going to go there, right? And I don't have to repeat the verb because I already know what the verb is. Guatsawe would be when in the past. So someone might say, hey, they built a new clan house in Klapon. Ah, Guatsawe? When did they build it? When did that happen? The other ones are what for. And there's a subtle difference between these two. Datyesawe, like let's say I'm making cookies. Datyesawe, cookies, you say. What are you making cookies for, right? It's for something's benefit, right? And I would say, yeah, I'm making it for the students. I'm going to give it to them, right? So it's usually indicating that something is going to be given to someone, or it's going to help someone. So that's the sort of what for. There's two types of what for. The second one is tatqasa. So if I see you walking and I say, where are you walking? You say, I'm going to the store. Tatqasa. What are you going after? What are you going there for? So it's slightly different concepts. It's sort of like Datyesawe is what is it going to be given for? And Datpasa is what are you pursuing? Kind of. And then Wanachsawe is just why. Why is that? Wanachsawe, why is that? Everybody good?
Yes, .gov. You do the Sawe after that?
Yeah, usually. Yeah.
Sawe.
Right. And then, and so the way is usually there, because that could be a complete sort of sentence, right? Okay. Or I could just say dat sa. It seems like it maybe just wants the sa on there. Right. But it depends on the situation. Okay. So we'll keep looking at stuff like this, but we're just going to start with the top one. That's the one we're going to start with. You'll see these pop up. But here's a couple examples. We'll talk about what it means, and we'll also look at how it is put together. So here's a sample sentence. Dasa etu wasagu. Dasa etu wasagu.
Dasa etu wasagu.
What do you want? Right. So this context for this is maybe you're visiting an elder, or you're at a function. You come up to an elder, and you're really just saying, what can I get you? Dasa etu wasagu. What do you want? Like they might say, water, kakwe, Atchachisan is snacks. And then if we'll do a sneak peek grammatical breakdown of how this thing works. Green is sort of the verb phrase. That's everything you would need to really understand the verb. The orange is the verb itself, and the red is the verb root. So I decided to put this in there because you're going to become verb root detectives, and because that's how you understand how verbs function. And there's some other things going on here we're not going to talk about, because we just go crazy and have a good time. Okay. And then here's a different one. Which one of those is red? Okay, so this might be if we're learning color, or if we're learning these types of phrases, and I put lumps of Play-Doh up here or whatever. There's a green one, a red one. You come up and grab it. Right. So the way this one works, is the whole verb phrase. Right? You need that on in there to understand what's being meant. All colors in Tlingit are metaphors. It's saying it's like fire. On, you might remember, is fire. Yacheti means for something to be like that. It can also be used just like a simile is. Someone might say, Wasasiyati, how are you doing? Kutyacheti, I'm like a whirlpool. Life is chaos, right? And that's a good answer sometimes. The verb is yati, t is the root. And I'll put the slideshow up on Tlingit.info as a PDF if you guys want to look at it again. And it's also, all these classes are on YouTube if you want to watch them again. Wasa'iyati. Oh, we didn't do that. No, we won't do that. And we'll do this one. Wasa'iyati.
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 How are you? Right, so editing, I think we talked about this in here. When you're asking a question in Tlingit, it gets put together grammatically. That's not how English takes care of questions, right? English does a number of things to ask questions, but sometimes the tone goes up at the end, right? That's what happens, right? I'm Ron Burgundy. That turns into a question. That is not how Tlingit takes care of questions. So you have to destroy that concept in your brain whenever you're asking questions. Because you wouldn't say, wasa'iyati? Because you have ruined the verb. And because it's a tonal language, you cannot change the tone to try and this is very hard. I do this all the time, right? So like, there's a word, tsuk, it means more. So you might say tsuk, but you should say tsukge. Do you want more? So there's another thing which is get, which we'll get to that. But that just turns it into a yes or no question. So you're going to see that. So question forming in Tlingit is very important. It's a tonal language. Don't ruin the language. So the whole verb phrase is iati for someone to be. And this is just saying, how is your being? Right? Yati means to be. It is the object pronoun. We'll get to that stuff later as well. So here's another one with the adu. When you combine it with verbs, it tends to want to get this ch on the end of the adu. And you're going to see that in a few different places. This is called an ergative marker, and not all languages have it. But it's just saying, like, if you were getting into a weird sentence like, the rabbit watched the dog chase the cat, right? If you're going to do something weird like that, you have to take care of it with word order in English, right? Because it could get just really weird, I think. The chased cat, dog, rabbit watched, right? It can get really bizarre. But this does is it marks the subject. So if it's attached to a noun or to a do, in this case it's saying, who was it that did this verb? Right? And in other cases you might say, Kach, or Kach is the word for dog. It gets the CH, so you know that's the one doing the chasing. The cat's running around. Adusa, awasha, And that would say who married, and for people to get married, it's not, because in English you could say I married them, which would mean like, doesn't mean you're all married now, it means you conducted the service. So here's how it works. There's the ergative suffix, which really makes this whole thing a verb phrase. Now you need the whole thing. And the verb is awashah, for someone to marry someone. Things we're going to start talking about before too long. First person, second person, third person. To drive this concept home, first person is always self. The speaker talking about the self. So if you're the speaker, it's me. Second person is you. Third person is him or her. Right? So we do this whole thing, and we're going to drill some of this stuff. Pronouns are very important here. Last one. So here's the gu, that particle, which is asking where. But it always, when it comes to directions and locations, so we dig down how he used to talk about it. And people said, hey, you should translate, see, spot, run. Or you should translate, and he's like, where's it going? What's it going for? Gotta know this stuff from Tlingit. You don't just go, And so directions and also locations, they want to know kind of two things. Is where is it heading, and sort of how is it there? And these are some things that we'll think about as they sort of challenge the way we think about how motion works and how other things work, right? So for something to be on the table, it could be just generically located on the table, could have just arrived at the table, or it could move around repeatedly or come back and forth. And those are three different types of being located at a place. In this case, we're saying, where are you going? The verb originally comes from going by boat, but then it just applies to going by car. So the one thing we're going to see with Tlingit is always classifying things. What type of motion is it? What type of object is that? Is this a singular thing or a plural thing? And so we'll just see more things like that. So the whole thing becomes the verb phrase. Day is a directional suffix, so it means to go towards something. It's going to pop up all over the place. Get used to it. There's a number of them that we'll look at over the course of time. Yani kuch means you are going right now by boat or car. Did we get?
Can you say that one more time? The whole thing?
Gudesa yani kuch. So the other thing that happens is when you get into the verb, if there's something that ends with a vowel in the verb itself, and then something that begins with a consonant, even though they're two separate words, they're just going to run right into each other. Yani kuch. And for me, it's yet kuch. So we'll get into it. Okay. So moving away from questions for a second. We talked about when. So now we need to start talking about sense of space and sense of time. Tlingit. Because in Tlingit it's different. To start with space, these four little terms, right, they're called determiners, if you need to know. They are reference points to say where something is at in relation to the speaker. It is always in relation to the speaker. So the first one is this immediate space. Yeah. I would say yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. It's nice and short, high tone. And that means I got it in my hand, or I can just grab it right away. Right? It's in this immediate vicinity. Next one is heh. 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 Honestly, this is the least used of the bunch, but it means like I can't really grab it right, immediately. But what I'm communicating is it's closer to me than it is to you. Okay, so it's a sense of space, and this one's starting to get into relation to other sort of things. It could also be right behind me. It could also be like nearby, but sort of unknown. Like if there was some crazy creature crawling on top of the ceiling, scratching around. I might say, das he. What is it? Someone might say, poutine. I'm like, oh, okay, it's a mouse. Someone might say, bonate, it's a monster. And then we would all run.
What if it was Kanakade?
Bonate, well, he's in the water.
Okay.
But I mean, like, that's, you know, but it was probably class.
Like Godzilla just coming from the giant car.
He's killing away.
Could be a kushka.
Huh?
Could be a kushka.
Yeah, it could, and again, I would run
It could be a kushka.
Just abandon abandon. Yeah,
Maybe.
like if I just heard that black bear last night, I saw it first, then but if I would say the time frame was a little different, I pulled up earlier and I was taking my boxes down and it came and knocked over. I probably wouldn't say that's the hate, thank you. I'd probably just say, that's gonna be and just run and jump off. But if there was like a more subtle noise, that's the hate. What is that? Strange. But this, it's not used very often. It's not used very often. Weh. 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 That over there. So for the wet space is really probably everything from these tables on for me. I mean, I gotta get up and go up and get it, but it's not a big deal, right? The next one is you. That means I gotta open the door. I gotta walk. It's over yonder, right? It might be over the hill. It's basically anything beyond the sort of initial sort of space that's somewhat nearby. A couple things to keep in mind with this. Can sometimes change the way things are, and especially with, like you could say, that raven is flying over there. But if I say ye, that means capital R raven in the raven stories, right? So sometimes it changes the definition. Tlingit doesn't have articles, like, you know, in English you'd say the car, a car, the car, right? But these can work somewhat in their place. Yatsi, this black bear right here, I don't know what I said. Yakucha, this cup, Wigucha. But it's instead of what the article is doing is saying like specific or not specific, this is saying here or there or way over there. The other thing is these vowels are written short, but they could be long. So ya, we, way, he, you, they're totally interchangeable as far as how they move back and forth. We're going to see later that these combine with all kinds of things in all kinds of different places. And there's a couple other things, directionals to think about. But for now, we're going to do a little drill because we have to get two of them in our brain. Let's start with two. And the two we're going to get is the two most common. Wet. So everybody put your hands to your chest. Put your hands out. Wet. 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 If it helps, you can say it's like kind of farther away, just wet. I generally don't like mixing English. Keep it separate.
You know, one of the questions I had was, is there like this kind of form of like Spanglish, but Tlingit?
Yeah, there's Tlingish. There's all kinds of Tlingish. And so some of the different forms of Tlingish is you might say, you might have a sentence and you'll have an English word. Right? Straw. Hand me the straw. Right? Or, you know, there's some words that just he went in his car over there. There's a word for straw. Not a lot of people are going to use it. I'm going to use it because it's awesome and it's fun. But it means a thing through which a person sucks something to themselves, which we're going to break down at some point. But then there's also sometimes people move in and out of the language, and so, or they might just use, when somebody's telling a story, and if they're telling you a story and they're not sure that you understand what that means, like, they think, he might not understand that. He gobbled it all up. And then they would move back into, they had just said that phrase. They might step out of the language. Sometimes people drift back and forth in and out of the language. And then there's also, sometimes we'll say, well, what are we going to call, this? Yeah. iPod. We're just going to call it an iPod, right? Because there's no need to come up with a different word for an iPod and an iPad and an Android. There's no need for them, right? We don't need to come up with a bunch of different names for things. But then sometimes people might make jokes about it too. Like, right, where you're mixing your Tlingit grammar with your English grammar. And then the thing that is very common for beginners is they'll use Tlingit nouns with English verbs, right? They'll say, hey, ha, wait, speak. Are they walking? And so you would end up, you're not sure how to do the verb, so then you just use the English verb to translate. Ideally, you're using English nouns in Tlingit grammar. Then there's not really like any sort of pidgin language that I know of, but there are people who move back and forth. And sometimes people get excited, and it comes out sort of really pretty scrambled.
Sounds dangerous.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting watching those two sisters talk in car cross, and then the younger one, I can't remember her name, said cranberries. It's kind of interesting watching them kind of falter for a second.
Right. Yeah, and so you'll see a lot of speakers who sometimes they're going and they'll forget words for things, because for all of our speakers, the tragedy we have to fix is they spend probably way too much of their life outside of the language that they want to use. So then they end up, they have sticking points, or sometimes they can't remember the way a certain thing is called. And the other thing to keep in mind is I was in Haines, and there was somebody who came from the interior, and we were just visiting, and I brought up, she was asking how the class went out, and I said, oh, it was great, We had at one point like 24 kids there. We usually had 8 or 10 people. We did an awful lot of stuff. It was out at camp. It was wonderful. And I just mentioned that I saw someone in the community who said, I'd really like to go, but every time I think about speaking my language, that man is right there getting ready to hit me. So the after effects of boarding schools and residential schools is very real as well. I had an elder, and we were just trying to get her to say, change the diaper. And we were going back and forth with a bunch of different elders, no one could think of it. And then later she talked to me, and she said, you kept asking me. And she said, and there's a block there, because I used to get hit for speaking my language, and sometimes that block comes, and she was very upset. Not upset at me, but she was very upset. And then the response that this person said, she said, yeah, a lot of our elders are deaf in their left ear, because a lot of people are right-handed. They would cup them in their ear, and they would speak the language. And so just to think of the level of torture and child abuse that happened because of languages. And it wasn't always that brand of physical abuse. There was a lot of mental things. There's all these stigmas that exist about our languages, because people would say it was so simple. Or there was a missionary who was among the Tlingit people, and she says, I've been with them for 2 weeks. Their language is incapable of expressing complex ideas. Let's just teach them all English. Right? And I always think, if I had found the genie and I had 3 wishes, I would totally waste one of those wishes on resurrecting that lady and making her sit for Tlingit linguistics and learn some stuff. But also, there's a lot of other things. There's a lot of pain around languages. There's a lot of doubt. There's a lot of guilt. But what you got to do is you've got to power through those things with work, and the language actually is a huge part of that healing process. Regardless of who you are and where you're from, getting the language back on the land and into the community is tremendous. it's fun, it's rewarding. It's not rewarding the way it should be, you know, but we'll get there. Our last minute. Anything else?
I think it's kind of funny that I'm not in Mexico and people are calling each other way.
Calling each
Or
other
saying way
way?
for bull, you know, in Mexican slang.
Oh, okay.
It's like, ¿Cómo está, way? Like, how are you, dog? You know, but bull, and, you know, calling somebody a bull is like he's wearing, you know.
Interesting.
So.
Okay, so what we're gonna do tomorrow, if you can, bring a little bit of food. We'll share a little bit of food. Those of you online, bring some snacks, snack it up. And what we're gonna practice, even though we have food, is this question and answer drill. So the question is going to be das away, and the answer is going to be whatever it is, this noun, followed by away. Okay? Because it's always going to be on the screen. If you were holding it, it would be allá. So if I were holding it, I would be das allá. So, but we'll get to those. Our first sort of focus is on the difference between here and there. And what is it? It's this. All right.
Sheesh.
Sure.
That's